Good morning, BlackAlps. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Sylvain, as well, for the invitation and the honor to speak today. And we're going to look into a ransomware case, and I've got a little disclaimer up front. So normally I would have loved to have the actual CISO who was involved in the crisis management with me. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, which also means I had to anonymize the presentation, so I can't name the company, etc. But I still think there will be plenty of interesting, hopefully, takeaways for everyone in the room. So let's jump right in. I like this sentence, and of course you may think of Jacques Chirac whatever you want. It's not to make a political statement here. It's just, I think the saying is quite true. When you're in a crisis, one problem never comes alone. It's always in swarms, and in French it just sounds even better. Les emmerdes, ça vole toujours en escadrille. So just sort of like that saying, and it's going to follow us through the presentation. So let's start right off, right? It's relatively big company in Switzerland. They've got subsidiaries, they share a common IT infrastructure, everything is fine, it's Friday morning, 8 a.m., people are eating croissants and drinking some coffee. Some people in the hallway are like talking about some sort of cyber attack maybe going on, but for the most part, email is working, applications can be accessed, all is good. Or is it? Of course, in some areas of the infrastructure, this has already happened. And across the street from that calm office, the crisis cell has assembled in the war room, and all hands are on deck. It's not funny at this point. I don't know who of you have ever been in this situation. It's very, very stressful, and if you don't, coordinate properly, it's just headless chickens running around. And yeah, some of the subsidiaries especially are already feeling the effects. They can't work anymore. And, well, needless to say, between 8 o'clock in the morning at 12 noon that day, everything's going to be down. So it's, as you know, very quick. But let's take a few steps back and go back a few weeks and see how this initially happened, right? The initial entry and everything. So, you probably know this as well. You don't know this up front. The crisis is always a moment of uncertainty. How do you manage that uncertainty? And it's later when you get to do the forensics that you find out, this is how it happened, and, this was the initial entry. And in this case, and you might laugh, because you're going to think, the usual suspects. It was a third-party account that was compromised. They think probably phishing, initially got them the credentials, and then they got in. Of course, there was no MFA, but even worse, this was a third-party account from a software engineering company that was, part of the supply chain. We call it that, I guess, these days. And they had their contract terminated already, so the account should have been decommissioned. Of course, it wasn't. And so they gained an initial foothold, moved laterally. Forensics later also, the SOC and forensics later found Cobalt Strike beacons and all favorite tool Mimikatz being used to sniff domain credentials from one of the servers they had infiltrated. And then from there, of course, they took over domain controllers and for 3 weeks stealthily deployed across the infrastructure. At this point, and I'm very interested, I know there's a talk about SIEM a little bit later, I forget the title, but I'm curious to hear that. If you've ever worked in a SOC or, using a SIEM, it can be a nightmare, signal to noise ratio. And, well, in this case, yes, there were a few alerts, and they did actually disable a few accounts, but it just wasn't enough to declare an incident, and we'll talk a little bit about SOC improvements at the end, but at this point, unfortunately, nothing was reported. And then we're back to Friday morning. Boom! They detonate the ransomware. It's, the payload is executed and the encryption starts. Countermeasures at this point start as well, and the crisis cell assembles. And here's the funny part. Well, I don't know, funny. They have an incident response playbook that they updated 2 weeks ago, thankfully. I don't know about you, but I've known a lot of cases where you ask, hey, do you have an incident response playbook? And yeah, sure. We have done one 74 years ago. Let me dust it off for you. And then you look at the call tree and none of the people there actually work in the company anymore, etc. It's the simple things. When you assemble the crisis cell, can you reach everyone to actually come to the crisis cell? Are they still working there? Stuff like that. And so luckily enough, they had this ready. They had updated it 2 weeks ago, and they wanted to test it in summer, and now the real case came earlier. And next thing that happens that you might not think about is that, well, when everybody sees that red screen, people start to, well, not straight out panic, but it's, oh, what's going on? Is the CEO, do they know? What is IT doing? I'm going to lose my job. This is going to ruin the company. And people start, running around and asking questions and etc. So here as well, very, very initially, we're going to talk about communication. And in this case, internal communication. You need to talk to your employees very quickly and reassure them. Yes, we've seen this. We are working on it. Team A, please stay here. I don't know, public relations, legal, HR, IT, of course, IT sec, the external, CCERT company, etc. All the people that need to be involved, you stay here. The rest you can go home. We've got it checked, Just telling them what's going on, being, open, and just helping the people understand, because in these cases, uncertainty, fear and doubt, FUD, that whole thing, will make it worse for everyone. So you need to be communicating. And then asset management. It's funny, I just talked at the coffee just before how, especially in a crisis, but asset management is always a problem in bigger infrastructures. Nobody really does it well, right? And they just didn't know. I mean, sure, some things were obvious, right? Some systems were obviously compromised, but they didn't know exactly how bad it was, where exactly, And again, if you have good asset management, that's going to help. But in this case, still a lot of uncertainty. The one thing they knew was, of course, that the domain controllers were down. So that did not help. And at this point, again, almost nothing worked. So now they call the cantonal police and the NCSC, which is a very good thing to do. So if you're ever in this case, do that right away. They will help you. Do not be afraid of, oh no, we can't, it'll be public and I'll do it. Well, that's just my opinion. And so everything was encrypted, including, of course, the backups. Didn't mention that, but yeah, that's what they do. They encrypt the backups first. Some were offline, so good for them. And at this point in the crisis cell, the CEO is involved, and first forensics, first logs show, okay, well, apparently they've exfiltrated around 5 gigabytes of encrypted data. So, they're not going to be able to do much with that. Well, it's fine. We're not going to pay. And so they don't even negotiate they don't even click on the ring, they don't go on the link, they don't negotiate with terrorists. Don't negotiate with terrorists. With attackers. And they just think, okay, we're going to fix this, we're going to, rebuild the infrastructure, and we're going to be fine, and we are not going to pay. On the other hand, just to be sure, they did have a handler on the side who was going to be ready to, transfer those cryptocurrencies if needed. But the decision was made not to do it. And so this is a bit of the image of rebuilding the infrastructure, right? So you have the detonation of the ransomware here, and then I guess this vertical here on the y-axis would be if at the top you have full functionality. So of course the red zone, this is affected, and at the time, the head of infrastructure would say it just, if the analogy would be a completely bombed city. It was just a mess. Some things worked, and they patched here and there to make, important point, they had some OT as well, so some actual, mechanical production, and that had to work, and so they did what they could to sort of make that work. And some base systems in this red zone were working, so that's sort of indicated by this red thing, but clearly there was a huge gap to full functionality. And also none of these systems synced anymore, so they knew they're going to lose functionality if they don't, fail over to a secure infrastructure, which they were building right from the start in parallel in a green zone. And this was roughly 2 weeks before Easter, so this all happened in 2 weeks. And they thought, okay, well, the Easter weekend is going to be our time slot where we can do this. It's going to be a few days, everybody, all decks on hand again, and we're going to, fail over, turn on the new domain controllers, rotate all these credentials, etc., and fail over to the other infrastructure. And that happened, and it worked. Actually, nobody expected that it would, but it worked. And then they had a minimal viable product. I guess that's the term, right? To run on. And famously, the same head of infrastructure said, okay, guys, so now we had the Cyber Restore Sprint weekend. welcome to the Cyber Restore Marathon, because it was going to be weeks before everything is back to full functionality and normality. And that brings me to the next point, which is very much human. So in these crises, and in this one in particular, those 2 weeks, the IT people in the crisis they didn't see their families, essentially. They were like there in 5 o'clock in the morning, back at 11. I mean, not 24/7 because you can't, but almost. And this is a real risk as well. You will burn out your people really, really quickly, and you need to plan for that, right? You need to think ahead and say, will we need third-party help in a crisis? The actual people that are going to, work there. And it takes a huge toll. And just interestingly, I mean, it wasn't even a week ago, I think, I saw this article and I read about it. So another famous case, SolarWinds, I think would put supply chain attacks front and middle of the news. And the CISO at the time, I didn't know this until I read it myself. He says, he lost 25 pounds in 20 days. And he actually had a heart attack after the breach. So, yeah, it can really make you suffer. So, yeah, beware of those human assets you have. Plan ahead. Plan third parties if you can. And then, of course, we come back to that fateful decision not to pay and not to negotiate. And thinking, hey, first indication was just 5 gigabytes of encrypted data. Turns out that was wrong. Again, uncertainty, right? So what they really had was 500 gigabytes of extremely sensitive employee data, including medical stuff. And so, because they were very good at this, they communicated, again, internally. There was some external communication as well. We'll talk about that. But, internally. And so they had an internal press conference, I suppose a bit like me speaking to you now, except with very, very worried employees that were like, what the hell's going on? And is it my data outside? What's happening? And at this point, I mean, remember, this is, the dark net, so you access it with a Tor browser and it's all very slow. Just downloading the 500 gigabytes takes forever, then it's unstructured data until you make sense of it. It takes weeks. So they didn't know. All they could say, we don't know, we're not sure, we're sorry, we don't know, we're not sure. And everybody is extremely concerned. So think about this. This is going to happen as well in a crisis. You're going to have to address the people in uncertainty, and you're not going to have any good answers. And it's something, very stressful that you need to prepare for. Yes, this was done with AI, by the way. And one of the big questions was, well, are we safe now? Can it happen again? You don't know. Hopefully not. We're doing, we're putting countermeasures in place, etc., and then lessons learned later, etc., and then we'll try and fix it. But of course, it could always happen again. The only thing you have left to do in the end is apologize, honestly. Okay, so let's get to the lesson learned. This one will surprise no one in the room. If you don't have top-down management support in your company, cybersecurity doesn't exist. Same for a crisis, of course. Yes, and do dust off that incident response plan, business continuity, disaster recovery. In this case, we're talking a disaster, so, all of these. Dust them off, train them with your third party as well. Cyber hygiene, all the basics. What was that with the account not being decommissioned and no MFA in place and not enough network segmentation and not enough patching? The usual suspects. It's important. It's the basics. I think the NCSC actually says at this point, the advice they give to companies is like, listen, if you do nothing else, just make sure you patch, make sure you deploy MFA, and have some sort of backup and restore process in place. With restore being important, you need to test that. It's like the incident response plan. If you don't test restore processes, it doesn't work. And automation. So now we have very complex environments, hybrid clouds, whatnot. Use the tools that you have now, infrastructure as code. These things that you can just automate: configuration management, compliance management, automatic monitoring. You don't need to deploy agents. You can do it with the APIs. Do it, because otherwise, manually, you will get lost. It's not going to work, and it's going to help you a lot with that cyber hygiene. So make sure you get the funds from your management to actually live that kind of approach. And interestingly, I read an article by Galaxis Digitech just the other day. They're doing this on premise. So, Terraform, Ansible, etc. So they're, managing their own infrastructure and also using these, ISE approach. And then SOC, so SOC improvements. So the SOC didn't alert in time, but again, for those who've worked in the SOC, the signal-to-noise ratio can really be a problem. Use cases can be a problem. If the customer isn't working with you, helping you understand, as a SOC analyst, you need to understand what actually makes the company tick in terms of what log sources are you actually going to ingest, what severity of logs are you going to ingest, how the log source is configured. And I've seen, everything from, we want to collect everything from every system. It just doesn't work. And then you have, yes, but the ML AI will, figure it out. No, it won't. Garbage in, garbage out. At least that's my opinion. But if anybody else thinks differently, please come to me and convince me afterwards. So that needs to obviously be done. And they did it in this case. And again, involve the police. Negotiating with the ransomware people. They can help you with that. They don't typically do it, but they can. And in this case, they did. So, don't hesitate. They will help you a lot, especially if you're unprepared. Have the CCERT ready, but don't for a second think that, we have a third party, it's good, we have a CCERT, red button company, they come in when there's a problem, so we can just relax. No, you have to train with them. That incident response plan, involve them, they must know you, they must know the processes, you must know their processes, etc. And then again, I think, the most important part, possibly, because we're dealing with humans after all, is internal and external communication. So we've talked about internal, because that may be less obvious. But the obvious one is also, what do you tell the press, right? External communication. Or also, the board of directors, all these people that need to be informed. Be proactive. Don't let someone else, worse, the press, control the narrative. You're a victim here. You're the one being attacked. You're not the culprit. So, be proactive, do it early, communicate honestly, communicate to everyone, say what you can. You don't need to say everything because, again, there's a lot of uncertainty. But at this point, you want to be proactive. And this might seem obvious, but not everyone does it. Remember Dieselgate? Yeah, they lied. It didn't help them much, did they? So, do not lie. And then this is a takeaway. Again, when you're preparing for a crisis, these are the things you need to think about up front. When do you actually declare it? Now it's a crisis. Now we need to get this out. Now it's the war room. Let's go. It's a bit obvious in a ransomware case, but it's not always the case. You need to think about that up front. What do you need to know? So now you're in the crisis cell and you're like, okay, what are the next steps? What are the priorities? Where do I get my information from? And how do I make sure that information is correct? Again, everybody's running around like headless chickens. It's stressful. You need to find out what you need to know and then plan and decide your next steps. Who do you need to involve? The board, the press, the hackers. You need to communicate with those as well. Maybe or maybe not. You have to choose. The employees, the supply chain partner, logistics, etc., etc., etc. It's huge, right? So think about who are the stakeholders that need to be informed. It's like a RACI table. Who's responsible? Who's accountable? Who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed? And sort of said that already. What are your priorities? So what do you want to achieve in the crisis cell? What do you need to achieve in what time? Again, failover in 2 weeks, for instance, blocking everything, containing everything. You need to think about that. And finally, how do you communicate to whom and when? So we know security is about people, processes, and technology in that order. It's even more true in a crisis. And to finish off, just one little fun fact. So this company is a B2C company. So they cater to consumers. And some of those consumers are quite old. And so obviously they were very open in communication and they told all their customers, yes, we have been breached. Your data has been stolen. We apologize. And so a few weeks after the breach, they suddenly receive a lot of paper mail. Literally, post in the mail. Like, what's this? And then people, so from, I'd say, the older community sent them these letters, which were all very similar, saying, you lost, or my data was stolen, so here's my name and here's my address, so you have my data again. And so, that also needed to be managed, receiving 300 letters like that. But yeah, I thought there's also always a little bit of relief and fun, even in the worst of times. And with that, I know this was actually pretty short. We give you back some time. Thank you for your attention. And again, thanks for taking the time for me today. It was a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, for the first keynote. Are there any questions?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think we have one here. Oh, yes.
Thank you for your pretty insightful presentation. I was wondering if that's not too many details. How did they manage to do the failover? Did they start from scratch or had to reuse what they had?
No, so they really didn't reuse what they had. They started from scratch. I mean, yeah, I don't know all the details about that part, like whether they had to buy the servers and there were some things in the cloud as well. But yes, the idea was building from scratch because they just didn't know, again, they weren't sure how badly affected the red zone was, and the decision was made very quickly to start from scratch.
And as a follow-up, did they just burn the red zone or did they try to understand what really happened?
Well, there were forensics afterwards, right, especially as well with the NCSC and the police. But to be honest, for the full details, I'd have to go back to the CISO and ask him. But if you give me your contacts, we can arrange that, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions?
So you mentioned that they rebuilt the infrastructure and you slightly touched up on the data that was actually stolen, which was more than expected. So how did the story continue there?
What do you mean exactly? In the end, what happened? Well,
yeah.
Sorry, good point.
Did they
it was actually published. So it was published. Yeah, eventually the hackers who, were very disgruntled because they weren't being communicated with and negotiated with, decided just to dump the whole thing on the darknet. And that ended the case for them. They moved on, the hackers, but that's when the real problem started for the company, right? So everyone was like, oh, now everything's published. So yeah, good point. I should have said that.
Is there any other comment or question for Stefan? Yes, please, in the front row.
So were there some consequences or learnings for the company, like we should do immutable backups in the future, or
yes,
they
well,
changed
so
the CISO?
The SOC improvements and the cyber hygiene and the MFA, so they rebuilt a whole new IAM system, implemented MFA, had long discussions with their SOC provider, rebuilt use cases, etc. So and rebuilt the whole new infrastructure with a more of a zero trust approach. I mean, there's many things, but yes. But yeah, I sort of tried to summarize it with automation and cyber hygiene. Decommission those old accounts.
Don't be shy, we still have time.
See, yeah, it's funny, I thought it was overtime, but I wasn't, so, well.
Oh, you were really good.
Right.
So they dumped the data, it's gone, and if I think about like a bank and I store my valuables with them, someone breaks in, it's stolen. I mean, what about the liability of the company? Because it was the company's fault that they did not protect my valuables. Are we seeing in the industry kind of this aftermath when the data gets leaked? Do the companies get sued? What is their exposure there?
So, I mean, I think the best example would probably be GDPR at this point, where since 2017, if you don't have, I don't remember the exact saying of whatever Article 32, I think it is, where it says you need to have a risk-based approach and technical and organizational cybersecurity measures in place to protect the data. And if you fail to do that and the breach happens, then you're liable. And you're, 4% of your annual revenue, that sort of thing. Wasn't the case in here, right? Because this was in Switzerland, so GDPR doesn't apply, and if the new data protection law wasn't enacted yet. So the consequences weren't that dire, I believe. But I mean, by now, and there's plenty of laws now, right? Like breach notification laws. And in the EU, if you're a critical infrastructure provider, you need, and thankfully, right? I mean, promote cybersecurity, Sylvain said. I mean, I guess one way to do it is just to have a regulatory stronghold and just say you need to be doing this.
There's a question here.
I got a question regarding maybe the finance. Like, is there any help that helped the company regarding the cost of work that have been done after the crisis? Or
That's
it
a
was
good point. I
self,
haven't. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll have to again double check. But yeah, very expensive. I mean, of course, there's a few things. You can't mention everything in 30 minutes, but they had beyond the NCSC and then the police, they also had the company One Consult come in and help them and all. I mean, these things, right? Like once the fire is going, these guys, I don't know, don't want to put, bad name out there, but it's a lot of money per hour. So you're spending a lot on the consultancy to help and, and the whole cost of rebuilding the infrastructure, of course. I mean, it's plus the potential liabilities afterwards. It's, just the other day I read there was a company in Switzerland, some IT company that closed doors. Something with you because of a ransomware attack 2 years back. They were already struggling and that was that then. They just, it's sad but true.
It was self-financed, this case, maybe.
Yes, probably. Again, I'd have to do double check, and I'd happily do that. But I think so.
Another question here.
I was wondering how well designed was the incident response book that they had reviewed 2 weeks prior to the event. And more generally, how prepared were they for this event?
So according to the words of the CISO, it was pretty good. So, it really helped, again, because it brought the right people together and they immediately knew, and they also knew, we are going to involve the police. Our stance is not to negotiate. What do we do in terms of identifying, again, the assets? Now, they didn't know, right, and there was still some uncertainty, but they had a very good idea of the individual steps to take. So while I haven't read it in detail, from the words of the CISO, it was quite good. And I guess you couldn't say it helped avoid the worst because the domain controllers were gone, but still, I guess they couldn't have rebuilt in 2 weeks, if they hadn't done that.
Thank you. And did they have to rebuild from scratch or could they recover from some backups? Because you mentioned that they had some that were offline, I think.
Yes, for some of the unaffected, and maybe I didn't talk about this well enough at this point, talk about containment. Obviously, that was the priority. Like once after the Friday afternoon, really started, containing, isolating, separating. And for some of the backups, yes, some of the offline backups were then used to inject data into the green zone when they rebuilt that. So yes, to a very limited degree.
We'll take a last question or last comment. If there's anyone who'd like to ask, nobody. So thanks again for that great keynote introduction.
Thank you, Sandy.
And I hope you can stay with us a while today.
Yes,
maybe
I will
you have
stay.
the opportunity
I'm very
to speak
interested
again, Stefan. Thank you again.